15 Powerful Lessons from Biblical Figures Who Question God. The Bible reveals that even the most faithful followers sometimes challenged and questioned God when they felt uncertain, afraid, or confused. These stories don't indicate a lack of belief. They only portray real individuals facing difficult trials. In this article, we will look at 15 biblical takeaways from those who struggled with their convictions, but discovered something deeper about God in the process. Job's struggle. Job's life fell apart in the blink of an eye. He lost his money, health, and family. It makes sense that he questioned if God was being fair, wondering how a good and just God would let someone suffer so much. Job's story doesn't end with him getting answers to all his questions. Instead, he realizes that God's wisdom and plans are too big for humans to understand. His story encourages us to trust that God has a bigger plan, even when life sometimes seems cruel and pointless. Moses' doubt. Moses didn't believe he could lead a whole nation to freedom. He just felt like it was too big of a responsibility for a guy like him. He stuttered, felt undeserving, and questioned God's decision to pick him for such a big job. But God assured Moses that it wasn't about his skills, but his power working through him. Moses' uncertainties show us that God often chooses unlikely and unprepared people, which only proves that our weaknesses are where his strength shines the most. Abraham's plea. Abraham wasn't afraid to challenge God's decision to wipe out Sodom and Gomorrah. He asked if the good people would die along with the bad ones. His courage to ask for mercy shows that it's okay and sometimes needed to talk to God about fairness. Abraham's questions reveal that God is fair and kind, and that he wants us to try to understand his thoughts on things that confuse us. Gideon wasn't your typical hero. Just like everyone else, he had his doubts and wasn't sure of himself. He often asked God to show his presence through signs. God showed a lot of patience during these times. He kept reassuring Gideon that he was there even when things looked hopeless. Gideon's story teaches us that God gets our doubts. He often shows up in ways we don't see coming when we feel alone or lost. Paul's weakness. Paul, a man with remarkable faith, struggled with an unspecified thorn in the flesh, a constant weakness he begged God to take away. However, God told him, "My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness." As Paul dealt with his challenges, he began to understand that weakness doesn't hold you back, but gives God a chance to show his strength. Sarah's mockery. When Sarah heard she'd have a baby in her old age, she couldn't help but laugh. The thought of getting pregnant at her age seemed crazy to her. But even though she had doubts, God kept his word, and Sarah's laughter turned into happiness. Her story shows that even when God's promises look impossible, he can make them happen when the time is right. Zechariah's doubt. When Zechariah got word from the angel that he and Elizabeth would become parents, he questioned the possibility, given their advanced years. This led to him losing his ability to speak until the prophecy came true. Zechariah's story shows us that faith sometimes means staying quiet while God's plan takes shape. It reminds us that having doubts doesn't rule us out, but being patient and trusting are crucial to seeing God's timing unfold. Jonah's anger. Jonah's story goes beyond a man getting swallowed by a fish. It tells of someone who got mad at God for showing kindness to people he thought didn't deserve it. Jonah's anger towards God's compassion shows us that God's grace has no limits, reaching even those we might see as unworthy. This reminds us that God's mercy pushes against our narrow ideas of justice. David's life had its fair share of tough times when enemies chased him, and he felt alone. In his Psalms, David shares his worries and fears, but he always comes back to believing in God. His honest prayers show that God accepts our true feelings, and that when we let out our doubts, we often end up with stronger faith. Naomi faced many losses in her life. Her husband and sons passed away, leaving her alone in a foreign country without any hope. She even asked people to call her Mara, which means bitter. But as God's plan came to light through Ruth, Naomi's sadness turned into hope. Her journey shows that even when we feel bitter, God is working, often bringing back our happiness in ways we never expected. The Israelites' complaints. The Israelites were known for their rampant complaints during the desert seasons, even in the light of amazing events like the Red Sea being split apart and manna, bread, falling from the sky. Their ongoing unhappiness simply tells us how we can overlook God's gifts when we focus on what we don't have. Their story serves as a reminder to be thankful even for small things and to notice the everyday wonders in our lives. Jeremiah's tears. Jeremiah's role as a prophet caused him great pain because he had to deliver tough messages to people who didn't want to hear them. He cried for his country and even asked God why he had given him such a difficult job. But Jeremiah kept going, believing in God's plan. His story shows us that real strength often comes from keeping on when others push you away. Thomas's doubt. Thomas questioned the resurrection until he saw Jesus in person with his very own eyes. Instead of facing criticism for his doubts, Jesus asked him to feel his wounds. This encounter changed Thomas from a doubter to a firm believer. His journey shows us that questions and doubts can actually lead to a deeper, more genuine faith. Habakkuk's complaints. Habakkuk noticed unfairness everywhere and wondered why God appeared quiet. Still, God promised him justice would arrive, even if it took time. Habakkuk's path from complaining to believing shows us it's fine to struggle with God's slow justice. Ultimately, we learn that God's timing, although different from what we expect, is always correct. Doubt is a part of faith. The stories of these Bible characters show that having doubts about God doesn't make someone less religious. Instead, it makes them genuine. Having doubts means valuing your faith enough to question something that you think does not align with what you believe in. In fact, in these times of confusion and puzzlement, many found their faith grew stronger. God is open to our questions, and sometimes they help us understand His character and plans in a different light. So the next time life doesn't make sense, or you're not sure what is happening, think about these strong lessons. They show us that asking questions can be part of the journey to growing a tougher, more genuine faith. If you enjoyed this content, please subscribe, like, and share your thoughts below.